Hello, everyone. Welcome to UMD Media's weekly show, the H panel. The H panel today, the timely topic: resumption of Tigray war. What, how, and what to do about it. So the full panel is back, and 2 days ago, maybe now 3 days ago, at 7 a.m. local time, the Tigray media, Tigray television. Um, Released a statement from the military command of Tigray announcing that their start of a war front on the north, on the south front, or the southern Tigray, and 5 hours later, the government of Ethiopia as well, mentioning actually exactly the same time, 5 a.m. local time, the resumption of the war, but with TPLF, they call them, starting the war. So that would be the subject of the today's topic for the panel, and we will start with Professor Ezkel. As usual, what stood out for you? Of course, other than the main topic of the day, Ezkel.
Yeah, there were a number of things that happened this week in Ethiopian politics, in the Horn politics, but everything was dwarfed by the resumption of war in Tigray. So to try to even pretend that there is something else, a more important event that stands out would be pretentious for me. So what stood out is the war, the resumption of war in Tigray. The Ethiopian government has now fired the first shots. Uh, the Tigray command, this announcement that you just showed, it shows that the shooting war, in this case, shooting war because the war never stopped. The siege is an act of war, and as long as there was a siege, the war had never stopped. So this is simply the first bullets flying a couple of days ago. So it's the resumption of hot war. Other than that, the state of war had already been in place. In that respect, the Ethiopian government is now culpable. And what I wanted to say in that regard is that the Ethiopian government or the Arakila government has now started a war that it cannot win. The reason that I say this is that one of the tactics of the Addis Ababa government and the Ethiopian National Defense Forces was to use the siege to starve the Tigrayan population, um, hoping that the Tigrayan population would rise in rebellion against the TPLF because that they're going to hold them responsible for their miseries. That the TPLF could be isolated by the siege. Um, but what happened during the siege was that the TPLF, which had already always been integrated into Tigrayan society since its inception in the mid 1970s, was even more integrated into that society. So the idea that you could separate TPLF and finish it off, which the discourse from Addis Ababa shows, first is unattainable. It's conceptually incoherent. That was not going to happen. So the hope that the Tigrayan people would rise against the TPLF did not happen. And now by aerial bombardment, that the Addis Ababa government, and I have some information on that, the Addis Ababa government is hoping that the Tigrayans would rise in. You don't go to war in that kind of hypothetical situation. You don't start a war hoping that the adversary might be toppled by its own people. So they were trying to drive a wedge between the people of Tigray and TPLF. That is exactly what they are doing when they are indiscriminately bombing Mekelle. And the plan is to use winged airplanes and um, um, drones to continue to bomb. They're not planning, from what I understand, they're not really planning to go into uh, combat with the Tigrayan forces. So If they did, they would not find the TPLF they found in November 2020 or the non-existent TDF. If they did enter Tigray, you would see that they would face a battle hardened, well trained, well commanded military force. They know that. They're not going to go in there, but the point that I'm trying to make is the first point that I want to make is it has started the war that it cannot win. The Ethiopian military has never won any war against insurgencies. Several Ethiopian governments have risen and gone down, but the military forces that brought it down, the TPLF, the EPLF, the ONLF, the OLF, all of them are still there. It's never won any war against uh, insurgencies. Second, the Ethiopian government or the Ethiopian military does not have what it takes to win this war. All of this bravado that you hear from Addis Ababa, it's all a lie, including the downing of an enemy airplane the other day. It's just a bravado. I know of a letter written by Berhanu Jula, the Field Marshal, the Chief of Staff, on August 14, 2020, August 14, written to the government of Russia, imploring the Russian government to deliver the weapons that they had promised when Lavrov visited. I don't think the Russians have airlifted anything to them. The Ethiopian military is a hollowed out military. Since the cessation of hostilities with Tigray, they have rounded up youth in cities. They have trained them, but have not converted them to a fighting force. It doesn't have the weapons that it will need to face off against the TDF. And the ENDF itself, it doesn't have the command structure, the command and control structure. And this will take me into a long rehearsal on that one, but I don't know that the command structure is not ready to execute, to plan and execute a war. So it just cannot do it because number one, it doesn't have the necessary firepower. It doesn't have a fighting force, an effective fighting force, and it doesn't have a cohesive command structure. That is how this government or the ENDF is going to war. Now, the final thing that I want to say this is a war, the resumption of war in Tigray. But today, maybe this is the thing that I want to show you. Today, the civil war in Ethiopia is everywhere. There is an increasingly emboldened OLF, OLA, which in June had launched a concerted, well-planned attacks in Western Ethiopia, including in Gambela. This happened only after the Ethiopian government brought the brunt of its forces to crush the OLA in Western Ethiopia. That it showed that it is a well coordinated army now operating not in Western Ethiopia but in the environs of Addis Ababa. So the Ethiopian military has challenges that it cannot meet elsewhere in Western Ethiopia, Southern Ethiopia, Southwestern Ethiopia, and all of that map is showing where the challenges are. What the map is showing is where the challenges are for the ENDF. So the war front for the and where the security challenges are making it impossible. And when we talk about the conflicts in Ethiopia, that's what we have to keep in mind. That war is raging, conflict is raging all over Ethiopia. The Ethiopian government had started the war that it cannot win. When I say that, because the challenges are everywhere, including from southeastern Ethiopia, where Al-Shabaab had entered Ethiopia and shown that they can do whatever they want to do in the Shabelle Valley. It has started a war that it had not, it would not be able to win. What the implications are, we will talk, but that's what I wanted to say about it.
Thank you, Skal. We'll go to Faisal. One thing that when we were planning for the show on Monday, around Monday, we were talking about, you know, is the war imminent, and how to, the topic was meant to be how to avoid it, or what would be the ramification regionally and so on. So uh, Scale texted me saying, if it doesn't start before Friday, and we know now where we are, and there was a mention about the airstrike in Magala today. This is a short clip on what it looked like in the kindergarten that was bombed this morning. We are not showing obviously graphic pictures. Faisal, what was the highlight for you over the past week?
Thank you very much. I think, as Scale said, there's one major highlight that nobody can miss, and that's the war that erupted. And I agree. I think there was always a situation of war between Tigray and the Ethiopian government. It just there was a lull moment, but that has been broken primarily by the Ethiopian government. I think when you go back to the issues that Scale outlined and touched for us. First of all, it's only a person who lived through Ethiopia's air bombardment that can imagine the outcome of two things. One, the level of terror those planes enlist in the people, civilians. The army doesn't care really, because part of their training is to ignore the sound, the supersonic sound. But the average citizen, they come close to some sort of like bullet hitting them. I lived in 1977-78 when Ethiopia was defeated by the Somali troops and the Western Somali Liberation Front. I was in Jijiga. The time, every now and then supersonic that used to hit Jijiga was just what it reminds me when I look at this picture. Is killing civilians. What I get from there is it's a desperate act that government is and regime is like, we finally realize that the only way they can break down their enemies, such as TPLF, is to terrorize the people, and people will rise up and oppose them. But actually, the reverse, lived history will tell us that the reverse happens. Eritrea became radicalized because of the bombardment of civilian centers. Tigray in the 70s and 80s got radicalized because of Ethiopian troops bombarding civilian centers. Mogadishu, today the number one anti-Ethiopian society within the Somali context is not Jigjiga, where colonization has humiliated. It's not Somaliland, it's not Puntland, it's Mogadishu, because the 2007 bombardment, where 2 million people live, indiscriminately killing pious elderly men, women, children, radicalized the population of Mogadishu today, that if you pick any person or any group in the Horn of Africa and survey who opposes Ethiopia's regime, irregardless who they are, it would be the residents of Mogadishu, simply because they have seen what those planes did. So if Abiy thought that he will win friends by bombarding Magale, and today even hitting kindergarten, well, that guy must be reading books that we don't read. He must have reading his own books. Having said that, I think I'm a little bit alarmed by the context in which this resumption of war, if you will, took place. I think this war or resumption of this war is preceded by the West showering praises and bonus cash to the Ethiopian regime. There goes the West. The West is behaving in Ethiopia how it behaved in South Africa, how it behaved in Palestine. This is really a text case of the face of the West. Those of us who really lobby around the West are dreamers, and nothing is wrong to be a dreamer. But the result that we are expecting from will never happen. And that's where I like Somalis in terms of how their lived experience informs them. There is very rare that you will see a Somali hoping positive thing to come out of the West. And why? Because their history tells them that always the West sided against them. I think sometimes what I have seen with the people who are supporting the people of Tigray is they overemphasize and approach the West in a very naive way. And the fiasco that quote unquote happened with the, if you will, for the lack of a better word, conflict around the gallons of, gas or, that happened, which we haven't yet really, clarified as to what actually happened. You can tell the appetite the West, the NGOs, the United Nations, Samantha Powers, all of them had to jump on the wagon before they even got a good picture and come in public in droves to condemn TPLF. What does that tell you? These people are married to the status quo, whether it is in America, where I live, where I've been observing, whether it is outside there, they are always, the philosophy of the West is that cash and put your cards with the status quo and you don't lose. And that's what happens. The way they jumped on this was very amazing. So for me, the war was expected, that war was happening, and we discussed it quite a lot in this venue, how Abiy was never honest about resumption of peace in this area. But what we didn't know, and what a lot of people underestimated, is the backdoor talks that's taking place within the international ICO international community, which in my opinion has never been an honest broker, let alone the AU and what have you. So it is a rude awakening. And I think that rude awakening, both on the TPLF side and the people who support TPLF, and on the Ethiopian side, may give this war this time around a different take. I think this is death or life. I don't think the two would coexist from now on. TPLF and Tegaru people have seen how Ethiopia is no longer a home to them, and what they have to do is what they have to do to liberate themselves. What we see from Arat Kilo is nothing of humane approach to this issue. And there is no peaceful ground, and we have to watch what happens.
Thank you, Faisal. It's interesting you mentioned about the fuel issue because just in less than 24 hours came the airstrike. So those people who were responding quickly and with outrage about the fuel, they were either saying lightly, reportedly, not confirmed, all that about the airstrike, about the deaths of children and so on. So it's an interesting observation. Duke, it's great to have you back for the second time, and I hope you will really make it often, as we also receive a number of questions from our viewers. So welcome again, Duke. And so what's your highlight for the past week? You can go also beyond the week.
Sure. Well, let me just start and say that it's an honor to be here with you guys. I've seen you guys on the panel before, and it's great insight. And I'd like to sort of just touch base on what Faisal said. It's often misunderstood. The sounds of aircraft, the sounds of drones. Previous work I've done in Pakistan, in the Northwest Frontier Province, the areas where there are two drones in the sky at all times, and it causes, they diagnose post-traumatic stress syndrome from children who hear the sounds, because it's in an instant the world explodes. And that is the most frightening thing for a child, for an adult, for a parent, for anybody, any civilian on the ground. In knowing that they're hitting civilian targets is a horrible thing, and it's something that damages a person's psyche when they have to live with that. And for 2 years, it's unconscionable that we're back at this stage. But what struck me about the past week, and I will go a little bit further back, because at the beginning of the week, I was trying to make sense of the World Food Programme's food assessment in light of all of the wonderful news, the optimistic news that we'd been hearing from David Beasley about the famine being averted, about so much food getting in, which I assume he was correct that the food was getting into the capital. But what he was saying in June, before the swarm of special envoys got to Addis, the information they may have had coming into Addis was that things were getting a lot better. But what the Tigrayan people were telling him, or telling his assessment team when they were in the field doing these assessments, was that it is not getting better very quickly at all. Still, 70% had not received food aid in the past year. And these are of the people that have received food aid. 70%, not since June of last year had they received any food aid. This means that they've only reached 30%. 65% were still starving. We're still with poor food consumption, using extreme or high coping strategies to try to get enough food. What he was not telling people, David Beasley, was that the situation is still very, very desperate when it comes to food in Tigray. And the idea that we had sort of moved on from that this thing was fixed and everything was going to be okay, was another case of this bleary-eyed optimism that we see from the West, from the heads of the aid organizations, from the politicians, from the diplomats, this optimism that is killing civilians. I mean, not directly, but it is holding in place this system that is killing civilians. And it was very disappointing. And then when the invasion happened, it was just I was shocked. I knew it was coming, but I was still shocked. I was still shocked to see that it would happen. And so that's where I am right now.
Thank you, Doc. And so going to the topic, I mean, you already touched it in different ways. So resumption of Tigray war. There are people who just are observing the first 2-3 days of this new round of war, who are saying maybe it's a bit different than November 4th, 2020, and the aftermath of that, given that the level of support from Addis, from the public, and so on, is at different level. We'll see how that plays out or unfolds in the coming days and weeks. But how are you assessing both the domestic environment on which this is happening, and even people say, what is interesting about this timing? Why now? And for what purpose? So the what, the how. We will close the show today by asking what to do about it, given the peace process, the negotiation, and so on. So, Estelle, what would be your picture in terms of why now, and what does it look like domestically outside the war picture you painted for us rightly, in terms of the appetite for supporting, for warmongering, and so on?
Arakilo's war strategy with regard to the Tigray war is not that they're going to engage the TDF now and win the war in the battlefield. The strategy is that they would keep tightening the siege, which probably, and I'm going to have to go back and look at this, that probably the Tigray siege is probably now the longest siege in the history of warfare. In most cases, whether this is in history or even in recent wars, siege is a siege of towns and cities. It's not the entire region. I've not heard. So in that sense, the Tigray siege is probably the first in the history of warfare that you put an entire area under siege. So the strategy has always been that I was alluding to earlier, is to starve, to tighten the noose around Tigray, and cause the Tigrayan people to rebel against TPLF. When you're squeezed and keep blaming that the TPLF is the organization or the leadership that is causing your trouble, Addis Ababa was hoping that the Tigrayan people would just give up and say, remove this party from Tigray and give us bread, give us peace, and return to the status quo ante. That is the strategy. Even today, the strategy is that the Tigray would rise against TPLF. Why now? Two sets of issues. The assumption in the war command, but that's another matter, and in the Prime Minister's office, is that the siege had taken its toll. No weapons had gotten into Tigray. They don't have weapons. The population is weary and tired. It's been under siege for almost more than 6 months. So we have weakened it so much that it is now or never that we will be able to finish off the TPLF. It's the belief that their strategy is working. The second is the TPLF. They assume the TDF does not have is not a fighting force because it doesn't have the supplies that it needs, the logistics that it needs to be an effective fighting force. What they were counting is, or the Ethiopian military or the Prime Minister's office were counting on, is that the siege was so effective, no new weapons have arrived in Tigray. There has been no engagement. And because there has been no engagement, they have not captured anything from the Ethiopian military. So they don't have the weapons to fight. That the Tigray military or the TDF is not a competent fighting force at this point in time. So that is the assumption. Why now? Because the assumption is that they're tired, they're weakened, they're war weary, the population is war weary, this is the time. The other set is the assumption about the strength of the ENDF itself, that they have bought some weapons, wherever they could buy cash, they bought some weapons. I've heard that about six containers of Kalashnikovs and ammunitions had entered Ethiopia through Djibouti. They were also telling themselves, their own self-assessment, that they have trained sufficient military and a number of military ground force in the Ethiopian National Defense Force. But in addition to that, they could mobilize as much as 1 million soldiers to fight against Tigray from other regions as well. This is not alone. The Amhara region, what they are doing is just amazing. It's just perplexing. In the Amhara region, they have announced to the entire Amhara population the loans, the micro loans that they had, that the Amhara government had given to the farmers. All of it would be forgiven if they enroll to fight against Tigray. Any farmer, that is. Second, anyone who is armed with a gun or a rifle, if they want to retain the rifle, the government would pay for them if they go and fight. All of this abetment and mobilization did not work. They found very few people, very few Amhara farmers that actually were taking on this promise and joining the fighting force. So the assumption on the part of the Arab Kilo government is that they have enough men under arms to continue to lay siege, not engaging the TDF military, but continue to squeeze it with 1 million soldiers. And the third thing is they believed the balance of power the balance of power is tilted in favor of the Ethiopian regime. Out of this assessment, assuming that the TDF has been weakened and the Ethiopians have rearmed themselves and retrained themselves, this is the time. This is exactly the time. They have shown the world that they were ready for negotiated settlement anywhere on any issue at any time. They have declared that they have now the diplomatic upper hand. So this is the time to go. Now is the time to go and finish off the TPLF. That is why they wanted to do it at this time. But there are other issues as well. The lack of political cohesion within the PP party itself. But I don't want to complicate the matter, but this is basically the military situation that precipitated the war right now.
Thank you. To your point, the social affairs advisor of the Prime Minister was tweeting today. Let me share it, as he always does, with some analogies and so on. Here he says, ምላስ ባጠፋው ሌሎች የሰውነት ክፍሎች ምግብ ተከለከሉ አሉ. So he's saying the other parts of the body were deprived or denied food because of the ill doing or wrongdoing of the tongue. And the other part of the body then decided to rebel against the tongue. And he actually specifically mentions that they, because of the tongue, we cannot be deprived of the food, so we have to, attack the tongue. And then he says, የትግራይ ህዝብ ለህወሓት እንደዚህ ነው መሆን ያለበት። ማን ለማን ሲል መከራ ያያል። The Tigrayan people should do the same again as the TPLF. Otherwise, the suffering, all that will continue. So he's making it inevitable. As long as what you exactly mentioned, if they are not going to rebel again as a TPLF. So, Faisal, your take on the question and on the topic. You are muted, I guess.
Yeah. I think I will not add much to why now, because I think we knew that always Abiy and company were preparing for this war. I don't either assume also that TPLF didn't prepare for this. I think two belligerent groups were looking at each other and they know each other's behavior, and neither each side trusted the other side. We just don't have enough information as to what TDF's capability is and how they would structure this war. We can only fall back to its history and even what happened today. Within 2 days, Koba is fallen to, TDF forces, and basically some of the sympathizers to Abiy's side are saying, here they go again. They leave the Amara people being invaded, and the army is just, enjoying their wine somewhere. So the same disarticulation that we have seen in the previous war could be replicating now. See, the actors in this war, like any historical war, Spartacus and Athens, one is, in my opinion, fighting for survival. The other one is conscripted, as the scales say. A kid who is brought from Jigjiga will not be able to fight in the mountains of Kopa area. He will simply lost. This is exactly what happened to Ethiopian troops in 1977 when they tried to fight in the Ogaden Desert. They literally were falling like flies until Russia, Cuba, Yemen, Czechoslovakia, the entire Eastern Bloc came. And I was in Jijjiga at the time. That night they were just coming like rain from the skies to just give boost to the Ethiopian. So I think you cannot compare a 300,000, as the scale was saying, battle tested with some cause to die for, as opposed to some kid who has been either conned through some false incentives, or somebody told that let your dad leave because you guys are too much debt, and you sacrifice for the family. As soon as his family gets that money, his mind will change. So we have to see that that's still up there. But I think what is very, in my opinion, is predictable are two things from this. I think Ethiopia will change as we know it. With the Eritrean war, Ethiopia has changed as we know it. Today, there is Eritrea in Ethiopia. I think with the trauma that Duke was talking about, I don't TPDF and TPLF may be quiet now because of the international pressures, but if the war gives them any room to maneuver, they have no basis from the people of Tigray to bring those people to the fold or at kilo, at least the way it exists. And as far as Abiy is there, I think the talks that we have seen, brokered by the international, completely, again, completely tried to pay a blind eye to the crux of the situation, fold it and put that in the back burner as to why Ethiopians are fighting, why the Tigray problem. They didn't want to deal that. They just wanted to bring some semblance of peace. But the issues that are untouched will change the fabric of Ethiopia the way we knew it for good. What I think we could have changed the course. I think this war could have changed the course of Ethiopia's trajectory by two factors. I think the Oromo factor could change if Ola this time completely takes a side with TDF and engages the Ethiopian army from the south in a more coordinated way, then Aret Kilo will change. I think another factor that could change the Red Kilo and possibly probably bring TDF back to the fold is if the Amhara elite just finds its soul, does a soul search, and finds its soul as to raising the question, what do we want? Everybody knows what they want. A Somali knows what they want. An Oromo knows what they want. A Tigray knows what they want. I think the Amhara elite is confused. We know what they want, but they don't say they want Ethiopia united, but they are seeking Ethiopia united in the most illegitimate and wrong way to subjugate Tigray, terrorize Tigray, kill as many Oromos as they can, subjugate Oromo, and make Oromos conform to their way of Ethiopia. I don't think every other community that I know of is asking hard questions themselves. If you take the Somalis, they're really asking the question to be or not to be part of Ethiopia. The Tigrays are asking the question, how can we survive in this situation at this current time with this world? You know, the most disempowered community today in the world, probably in my opinion, even more than the Palestinians, are the Tigray people. The Oromos are asking existential question. I really wonder what the second majority community of Ethiopia wants out of this and what do they ask. And I'm saying this because, Ketajo, you raised a little issue, one issue. It said, you know, how does the community at all in general react to this? I think there was hidden message in that to say, how does the Amara community that was 100% pro Abiy in the last war are now behaving? I think we see some changes. I think a lot of people are finally coming to the terms that as much as the Derg destroyed Ethiopia indirectly, today Abiy is destroying Ethiopia. If they don't disassociate themselves from Ethiopia, not only would they lose the Somalis they have lost, not only would they lose the Oromo that they have lost, they are losing the most northern group in the Abyssinian culture, and that's the Tigara people. And if they don't change their attitude within the coming few months, while this war is raging, you see to Ethiopia, and I tweeted that the seventh emperor's dream being realized. Period. Abiy kills Ola, he kills Tigray, and then Abiy would be coronated as the seventh king as he dreamed. Or this war would drag Ethiopia to a repairable, those are the two choices. And I think both groups that I mentioned have significant role to bring this war to a short mission as opposed to a dragged one.
Thank you, Faisal. You talk about the reaction, and I think it's worth mentioning what the uh, I think it's called the Congress for Somali Cause. They issued a statement today where they condemn the renewed fighting in the Tigray region, and they mention as well about who to blame. So they are talking about the irrational decision taken by the Addis Ababa region. That is where they lay the blame. And they also mentioned what's happening elsewhere in Oromia, Somali, Gambela, Benishangul Gums, Kemant. And they also mentioned what was mentioned by Pekka Havisto way back in terms of wiping out the Tigrayans. This is at that time the European Union Special Envoy and Finland's foreign minister. He said the leadership in Addis verbally told him they have the intent to wipe out the Tigrayans for 100 years.
David, if I just add one thing that I forgot, I think Pascal mentioned all the geographies of the hotspots. The underestimated hotspot is the Somali Afar hotspot, which already small scale genocide or massacre, depending on what word you use. And literally, the passion of peace until now, since Abiy took power, where the Somali region, two fronts are burning. The Al-Shabaab that Scale mentioned, this side, which is the east and southern side, and the Afar Somali region, which is a very hot potato. Yesterday, Mustafa tried to silence the Somali clans in that area who are really up to arms, and he, out of the norm, awarded them with 2 districts, literally acknowledging that he cannot regain the 2 districts that the Afaris took from the Somalis. This is just a temporary relief, a bandage, and that fire is festering, and that's an addition to, you could see Somalis literally siding one way or another in this war theater that just started. Thank you. Sorry for jumping in.
No worries, you're most welcome. Duke, you can comment on the question I asked previously, but one thing that many are wondering, if you would share your insight on this is a question Dr. Mahari Tadal asked yesterday. What does the US administration want Tigrayans and Tigray authorities to do really? Sit and watch, as the other panelists were alluding to as well, and the people starve to death until enough number of days are accepted by Addis Ababa and Asmara and so on. So this is really a question that many are asking, waiting for 14 months under a siege, just even discounting the months before that. What is your reading of Washington? You can add Brussels or the international community in general as well.
Yeah, that was my take on the timing of this, was how that juxtaposed against the diplomatic surge that happened in the beginning of the month. And I can't get into the head of why the regime decided to restart the conflict, or restart the violent military conflict last week, or this week rather, but the State Department needs to understand what this means. The US State Department and the world, and all of the 5 or 6 special envoys that we have now dealing with this, need to understand what this timing means, coming quick on the heels of this huge visit, not only to Addis, not only to the capital of Tigray, but also to the African Union headquarters, to refigure this peace process out, or redistribute, or sort of do a halfway job of sort of a slight restructuring of diversifying some of the responsibilities to the other special envoys that have been attracted to this. And they need to understand that the timing of this indicates that strategy has failed. The U.S. approach has failed. If the U.S. approach was to calm down the violence, was to create a peaceful settlement, the mediation, the peace process, the AU-led peace process, those have all failed. It's very startling to see them try to go back to this idea of come back to the table, because it's a table that's reserved for one person. It's a table that's been set for the prime minister. And it has gone so far in that direction, this idea that don't even talk about basic services because we're going to talk for, you can't even, to communicate with home, you can't. I'd like to have a precondition that they won't be arrested when they come to show up at the negotiations. The fact that these things went so far to the side of the prime minister and against the interests of the Tigrayan people needs to be understood, that they are selling a peace process that is already broken. And the people that I've worked with at the State Department and people that have been there for their careers are generally passionate people, good people, political appointees that we have seen managing this entire, I don't want to call it a strategy, this appeasement response to the aggression of the Ethiopian government towards Tigray. It has failed. I don't know if it's because they don't see it, if they have been, stuck in the bubble around Addis Ababa that they can't get out of, but it's not going to play once they get to negotiations with the TPLF, because they have to deal with the reality of what the Tigrayan people are facing. And so I still don't have an answer to the question on that post of what the Americans expect the Tigray authorities to do, because it seems that they are either misinformed, willfully misinformed. It seems that they don't want to see what's happening in Tigray, and it seems that they cannot process the fact that reality is more important than the narrative that is being promoted by the government of Ethiopia, that they are attracted to, because, as we're talking about the status quo, because it allows them to keep on with this dream of the status quo. What they want is for the time to turn back 2 years, and for Abiy to be this great, promising young leader, this young reformer that's going to be a stalwart ally, and the reforms are going to happen and everything. I believe that they are living in a fantasy that we can go back to where it was, and we can't, because I don't think Ethiopia can go back to where it was. I don't think we'll see Ethiopia in the same condition that I saw it in when I was last there. I certainly don't think that Tigray can go back. They are chasing, it seems to be they're chasing a dream, and they need to understand that it has failed. The process has failed, and it's time to take a hard pivot towards protecting civilians, getting more realistic about their approach.
Great. Thank you, Doc. One thing that people are mentioning, actually, this is Jeff Crisp. He has been with the UNSCR. He was the policy development evaluation head before, and he is affiliated with Oxford Chatham House. And this was talking about David Beasley of WFP. When Mark Goldberg said, this is rare to see a humanitarian official call out something like this in such stark terms, Jeff said, I don't think he would have gone this far with a UN member state. So all this talk about TPLF versus Ethiopian government or Ethiopia and so on, there are people who are saying, it's just, if you are under a state, you are nothing. It's the state that should be kept, or the status quo, as you mentioned. So going to the last question or part of our show today, Scale, any way out? anything that I mean, the peace process based on Debretzion's letter from August 25, we have learned. Actually, many people were denying, including Magale and Addis Ababa, but UMD media reported it before. There were at least 2 meetings in person. Debretzion said in Djibouti, and I think Seychelles the second one. So there were these negotiations happening, whatever we call them. Is there any way they will be back to that?
I don't think so. There will be back to the negotiating table for a number of reasons, some of which Duke was just talking about. Look, if there is going to be a negotiated settlement, and I've written something about that in May, it has to be something like what Richard Holbrooke did, forcing them to the negotiating table, not cajoling them, not requesting them, but forcing them to the negotiating table. And it takes a muscle like the United States to force Abiy Ahmed to the negotiating table. That's what it requires. But the United States is not in a position to do that for a number of reasons. Maybe 3 for now, like I want to speak to. Number one, there is this tug of war between the special envoys and the State Department. The State Department wants to assert control over the conduct of foreign policy anywhere for that matter. But Molly Fee, the Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs, is adamant that she should be the one, and her office should be the one that should oversee American foreign policy. She starts from that dogmatic or doctrinal point and undercut the special envoys who actually were making progress. Especially David Satterfield was making progress. He is the one that arranged for first, the military leaders of Ethiopian National Defense Force and the TDF. They actually met and decided on terms of the cessation of hostilities. Look, cessation of hostilities simply means that the armies that are in conflict would retain their positions, but they would not fire. And that simply means that the military commanders would tell each other where they are, and that they would not fire. That is what cessation of hostilities means. And the 2 military leaders actually did that when they agreed on the cessation of hostilities. And of course, Abiy Ahmed went ahead and, because he doesn't want to announce together and share the limelight with Tigrayan leaders, he went ahead and said he had this unilateral humanitarian ceasefire. Because he's a narcissist. And I've said this so many times that he's a narcissist that he cannot accept this. So he went out and declared the unilateral ceasefire. All right, the Tigray government accepted it. David Satterfield made that arrangement. And then the civilians, one from the Tigray side and one from the emissary of the prime minister, secretly they also met and actually talked about an agreed how to conduct an agreed ceasefire and then proceed from there, making sure that the humanitarian assistance flows into Tigray unencumbered, that the reconstruction and every other thing that is the services that are disconnected would be turned on. All of those the civilians thought. David Satterfield made that. But Molly Fee, because she also wants to be in control, people who were making progress from the United States side on behalf of the United States were removed, or they were frustrated enough to give up their post while they were making progress. Look, the first envoy was reporting to the president because he was the envoy of the president of the United States. The second envoy, David Satterfield, was reporting to the Secretary of State. He was making progress even at that weakened position. The current envoy is now accountable to Molly Fee. She has bended everyone to her views. So if the United States is not in a position to force the Ethiopian government, like Dr. Mahari said, that they say they have no leverage on Abiy Ahmed. If the United States is not there, who's going to do it? Who's going to force Abiy to the negotiated table? Secondly, even the United States government has given up on negotiated settlement because they're spooked by China. They think that the Chinese are going to support Abiy Ahmed and they will be firmly ensconced in the Horn of Africa and push the United States out of the Horn of Africa. So the United States itself had given up on the idea that they would confront Abiy Ahmed because of China. So I don't see any other power that would force Abiy Ahmed to the negotiating table. That would have been the United States, but the United States is already undercut because of this internal politics. But here is there a way out? If there is no negotiated solution, then there will be a solution somewhere else. It has to come from there, so we can't go on a perpetual warfare in Ethiopia. As I said at the beginning, this is the war that the Ethiopian military cannot win for military reasons, for economic reasons, because we have to finance it, for all kinds of reasons that it will not be able to win. It can't. One important thing is that the Amhara base that would have wanted this war is now divided. From what I am hearing, it's only the Gondar Amhara in collusion with Eritrea that are passionately in favor of this war. The other place said we have suffered enough. Wallo Amhara said we have suffered enough in the first one. The Shawa Amhara said we have suffered enough in the first round of battles. What did we get out of it? Only suffering, only inflation, only famine. That's what we got. So they're saying they're not going to support it. This war against Tigray logically or would get support from the Amhara region, and it's not getting it. Let me add one more thing about this guy, David Beasley, that Dr. Mahari talked about. Dr. Beasley is a former South Carolina governor in the 1990s, and he's a member of the group that wants to install Pentecostal Christians as leaders in all of Africa where it is possible. Abiy is his man. Abiy is his man. When Abiy came to this country, he met with Mike Pence, who is also a member of this Christian group that are installing Pentecostal Christian leaders everywhere that are promoting prosperity gospel. When David Pence, what's the vice president name? Michael Pence met with Abiy when Abiy came here. The conduit that he gave him was David Beasley. So Abiy had backdoor connection with the Trump administration to Mike Pence through David Beasley. David Beasley was his man. David Beasley believes that Abiy was sent to salvage Ethiopia from the communists. So Abiy, by hook or crook, should remain in power. People are wondering why David Beasley is acting this way, because Abiy is his baby. Abiy is his man. Abiy is the sent one. He is the anointed one from David Beasley's perspective. That's why he is acting that way. This question that you raised about David Beasley saying all kinds of things about Tigray is because he is Abiy's man. So where is negotiated settlement going to come from when the Ethiopian government is hell-bent? And that is a strategy, I have said it a number of times here, the strategy is to starve the Tigrayan people to death or rebel against TPLF. That's how they plan to win this war. That is what's going on. There is no negotiated settlement. The only way out is to win the war and remove Abiy from power. Look, This is good for Ethiopia. This will be good for the Horn of Africa. This will be good for the entire African continent if this man is removed from the helm of power in Addis Ababa. That will be the only solution. You cannot negotiate with Abiy. He will tell you one day today, he will tell you something else another. You cannot negotiate with a man that changes his position every hour. That's the reality now.
Thank you, Scale. Faisal, you can add your final thoughts with that as well. What is the way out?
Yeah, I think I agree with the concept that says the U.S. government in general lost its power to bring any form of peace of the two sides. It's really very sad to see lightweight foreign interlocutors running the State Department, such as Mawli. You reminded me, Skial, a debate of the 1970s between heavyweight American foreign policy makers such as Brzezinski and Henry Kissinger on the 1977 war. I mean, the debate itself was lively. You could literally disagree with them, but see how they are looking at issues. This time, America is condemned to have charlatans running its foreign policy, and some of them don't even know. I mean, when you read what Brzezinski can write in foreign affairs and in the Horn of Africa, whether you agree or disagree, you would appreciate him. When you look at Henry Kissinger's career and being, the one who was running U.S. foreign policy in various ways, you can appreciate. You may disagree. Who is Malife and this lightweight people who really became into the ranks of the policy making of the State Department? I mean, I cannot imagine Henry Kissinger working through the campaign and being, awarded with a position, or Brzezinski. It's really sad. This is telling of how America's foreign policy and the State Department went through the doldrums. It says more about America than it says about the war in Ethiopia. Yes, Abiy can take advantage of the Pentecostal church, and he may be the boy of those people which I completely agree. But the other side of this story is this is not the America we knew. This is an America that, sorry to say, I wasted my vote for Biden, that he is sleeping at the wheel. He doesn't have really a command of the Horn of Africa, which is, in my opinion, a critical geography for the West and for America, and in general for world politics. He has never spoken one day about the crisis. And as you said, what happens in Ethiopia happens or impacts the entire Horn of Africa, no matter what. It is the most volatile region. And President Biden doesn't even have a clue, in my opinion. In the 90s, you could see some people who were really well equipped about the Horn of Africa, whether it is Susan Rice or Condoleezza Rice. We can go down the list. So one weakness, despite what's happening inside Ethiopia, another weakness is the weakness of America and where America is today. Absolutely. The only factor at this point in time they are looking is not human rights, is not really what's happening in democratization of the Horn of Africa. They are just rewarding Abiy because they are afraid, paranoia, not even afraid, because if you are afraid, you create the logistics. Paranoia about China. America is immobilized, literally immobilized. And sad to say that the only time America really won over Russia in the race for influence of the world was when Carter made at the UN human rights a priority issue. That's when a lot of third world people just flocked to America's policy and literally shifted from looking at America as that traditional imperialist country to give it a benefit of the doubt. Carter did that. I think this current dove democratic system that we have in Washington, I agree with you, clueless. They are petty politicians, and they are looking for the lowest hanging fruit without looking at the big picture. And we all are losing, whether you are an American who is a taxpayer or a third world Ethiopian who's expecting magic to come from Washington, which in my opinion will never happen.
Thank you, Faisal. Duke, your final thoughts and the way out.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what's said. Just thinking about Zygmunt Brzezinski and just imagining him in the room there with Molly Fee and Mike Hammer and these guys, and just you can't picture it. And this is I don't mean to shame Molly Fee in this, because this is ultimately on Secretary Blinken. The fact that she came, I mean, from her confirmation to the time that she had informed Congress that they were no longer pursuing the genocide determination was only about 2 months that she had been in her position. If she was truly the one who made that call, that's still on Secretary Blinken, because she should not have had the authority to make that call to shelve a genocide determination. I mean, that crosses a line into complicity that is something that there needs to be a top-down review of what happened there. The way the State Department is approaching this is very lost, and we are seeing mediocre figures being put in the decision-making place. It surprises me about Biden, because prior to Biden being president, he was on the Senate Foreign Service. I mean, his focus was on foreign relations. He was known for that for the longest time in the Senate, for being about foreign relations, for this being his one of his strong suits. I think that's why Obama brought him on to some extent. The fact that he does seem to be asleep at the wheel here is surprising. But the way out, there is still an opportunity I don't think it's going to happen, but I want the U.S. State Department and the administration to understand that there is still a way out. If they took a hard turn, if they pivoted and reconfigured what they're trying to do there with the mediation, with the peace process, everything, the words could stay the same. Come back to the negotiating table, but it's got to be a different table. There's got to be different people there. It has to be a different mediation, and it has to be under different terms. If they were ready to change their strategy, to acknowledge the failure of their policies and address this in a way that makes sense, not just for a handful of people in Addis, but for the people, these people who have been starving for 21 months. If they were ready to make that pivot, they could do this. I mean, it would be dicey. It's not the US's role to solve everything. I do understand that there are a lot of limits of powers and everything, but they could make a very good push of this. They could hopefully turn the tide and turn this back into it's the only way I can see that this thing calms down before it just becomes a fight to the death, which I think that's what we're in right now. I'm afraid of all the predictions coming true that people made. If they go back to violence, if they go back to an active shooting war, it's not going to stop until until there's some finality to it. And this is going to come out of the lives and the livelihoods and the food and the security of the civilians, not just in Tigray, but in Afar, in Amhara, and wherever this conflict leads, just as it's affecting the people of Oromia, just as it's affecting people elsewhere in Ethiopia. But there is a way out if the United States can recognize failure and pivot. But I don't see that happening, because that is just not in the State Department's culture anymore. They don't acknowledge a failed policy, because to acknowledge it is the only way it can be pinned on anybody, is if somebody comes up and says, yeah, I was wrong. That is creating a very bad policy, and it's creating people are so desperate to get a positive message, to get a win out of anything, small things like, oh, they're willing to come to the negotiating table, provided that we make all of these concessions to make it their way. That is informing the thinking, that's informing the strategy, I think. And it's creating just a international community. If the US is leading this, it's creating an international community that's just useless when it comes to foreign policy. We need to stand with the people. The people of Tigray are going to be here much longer than the Prosperity Party is going to be around. That's how it happens. That's how it's always happened. We were talking about the staying close to the human rights aspect of this. If the United States could get on board with what they're supposed to be doing as far as human rights, and what they're supposed to be doing as far as protecting these international ideals, then they could be in a better position to address this. But they're not. They're trying to stop the fight between the combatants. They're not trying to protect the civilians of Ethiopia. And that's where we're falling apart, I think.
Thank you, Duke. Still, if you have any parting thoughts, final thoughts, you can take it. Otherwise, we'll finish our shows at this point.
I mean, look, to win a war, you need three things: sufficient firepower, motivated fighting force, and a cause. This is absent on the Ethiopian side. I am hearing that in Addis Ababa, people are, as they say, we don't care. Like, we don't care whether it is Abiy ruling in Addis or TPLF coming. I actually am hearing from the military itself. They met about a week ago, the National Security Council met, which he chaired, which Abiy chaired. They met for an hour and he spoke for 55 minutes. No one was able to say anything to him. They don't ask questions. They don't hold any briefings for him. He assembles them, he talks, and he leaves. And then you will see on the nightly news that the National Security Council had decided this and that, just like the Council of Ministers. He is the one that is speaking. So even the generals are now saying, especially when they meet in Bishoftu, in the Ethiopian Air Force campus, they slaughter goats and eat the raw meat and then drink whiskey. There, what they are talking about is that we can't live with this man. He doesn't listen to us. He doesn't even consult us. Even the chief of staff is complaining that when Abiy wants to get something done, in the military, the chain of command is what makes the military the military. But Abiy calls Tasfai Ayalo and commands him to do whatever he wants over the head of the Birhanu Jula. So they're so frustrated. What they're saying is that now that nobody can remove him, we wish TPLF comes and Magalagal, I don't know what to say, in gets us some relief. That the TPLF does some relief. That's what the military is saying. So my point is, that's where I started. This is an unwinnable war. One, sufficient firepower, a motivated fighting force, and a cause. All three are absent in this war. It's absent. And the challenge is increasing on the Ethiopian government. My final word is, negotiated settlement with a madman is impossible. It's not going to happen. This is going to be decided in the war front.
Thank you, Skell. Thank you, everyone. We had followers from everywhere, and everybody, as usual, appreciated you. Faisal, you want to say something?
No, I just want to, I think Skell put it very well, the front side. I just like to rejoin what Duke said in terms of not giving up also on the negotiation side, provided that America, as the leader of the West, comes with a very concrete negotiating plan. Up to this point, the way we see has been haphazard, as we've mentioned, the infight within the State Department, an imbecile approach by AU's rep, who is useless. You used the word useless for State Department. I think AU is the most useless entity that anybody can come up. So I think, and America is one, as we have seen in terms of Yugoslavia and whatever. There is no dearth of knowledge as to how to structure a well meaningful and productive negotiating strategy. It's just that up to this point, the US has not been serious. They've been playing game with us. And I think if there is a plan to come up with a very serious strategy that has elements, including punitive elements, as to the side that breaks, because millions of people are involved here. And America slept at the wheel during Clinton when the Rwandan massacre was taking place. Experience is now what's ruling the State Department. Political experience, elections are coming. As Duke was saying, they don't want to be pinned down to any failure during the midterm and beyond. So Blinken and his team are being very opportunistic, but history will not be opportunistic. History will be very realistic, and it will pinpoint who was sitting at the White House and the State Department when millions of Tigrayans were, sieged and killed piece by piece through famine and starvation. And I think there's a heavy burden in the State Department, whether they will deny today or not. That's a question of experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Faisal. Thank you, everyone. I invite our viewers to share, like, so that many can access today's very insightful, great analysis from our panelists. And I also invite you to read this Peace Process is Dead, as is Fragile Ceasefire in Ethiopia by Alex Doyle, published today on Responsible Statecraft. Thank you, gentlemen, and hope to see you again next week with yet another episode of the H panel. Good night.
Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
You have been following us live and
Let's
on
go.
Spotlight as well in Tigray.
Okay, so we can go tomorrow.
And this is the H panel, the weekly UMD media show. We'll see you again next week. Bye now and have a good night.